Queen's Lead podcast. I'm your host, Amy Singleton, and as a child of the 80s, I'd love to say Queens rule, but they don't. Queens lead. Being a queen means you are worthy to be a leader of people. The guests on our show do exactly that. They are leading the way in their businesses, families, and communities. They're taking their rightful place in the spotlight, leading and inspiring the developing queens in all of us. Welcome to the Queen's Lead podcast. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Queen's Lead podcast. Today, I am so honored to be joined by Maria Nadapov. She is the owner of Synergistic Step Parenting. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. I'm so excited for this conversation. It's such a treat.
Me too. I'm pretty sure lots of my guests are step parents or may become one day. So I can't wait to hear about how we can do that better and more synergistically. I love that word as well. It's so intentional because the better we all are, the better we all do and all those around us. So tell us a little bit about who Maria is.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just start with my story. I'll try to keep it brief. So I was an immigrant when I was 8 years old. I came from Moscow, Russia, very different culture, like polar opposite, I would say, to America. And I don't think I realized it at the time, but I've since distilled that, the way I was brought up, the culture was kids are seen and not heard. The elders are the ones who have all the wisdom and kids basically know nothing. And also just to be quiet and obey, right? Follow the rules, obey, keep your head down. And so
so different than a childhood in the Bible Belt, just saying in the 80s, 70s or 80s.
Right. Perhaps. But I guess I was thinking, I grew up on the East Coast. So I guess I'm comparing it more to, that kind of approach. So in my experience, and purely my experience, I know there's a lot of varied stories out there. I guess, my understanding is like kids are raised to be autonomous in America. They're raised to parents at least want to try to hear what the kids are saying, and they want them to develop their voice and kind of follow, their heart. So, so what I realized is essentially as a child, I was severed from my voice. Right. And to me, the way that also equated is I was severed from my truth. Like I wasn't even listening for it myself because it was so much external influence of do this and all these different orders, so to speak, to follow.
Yeah.
And probably not surprising. So again, my parents also were immigrants. I mean, they had no clue.
Yeah.
Everything you could imagine was different, not only culture, but language and literally everything. So they weren't in a position to help me navigate the change. And on top of that, I was, coming into my own and developing into an adult, I guess. And so I had to seek support for that from outside of my family. And what I ended up finding was I'm really grateful for this person for taking me under their wing, but it was an emotionally and physically abusive relationship. And it lasted for 16 years. And I think that just further highlighted for me kind of the things I was coming into that relationship with that kind of brought me there that were already issues. And what I can say is this person, it wasn't malicious. I know them really well. I know their family really well. I can tell that they were just doing the best they could with what they had. They acquired survival skills and they were just navigating with what they had available to them.
This was your first romantic relationship?
This was my first. Yep. He ended up being my husband.
Okay.
My first love, my first everything. Yeah. And I think one of the other challenges for me in recognizing that there were issues on top of being extremely, extremely coddled and naive. And, the way I also was raised by my grandparents, because my dad left and my mom felt the ownership of I need to get a career and provide for my family. So I didn't see very much of her during that time as she was establishing that, which were my formative years. And so the way they dealt with that is they're like, we're just going to keep her occupied and in the house, locked up, kind of like Rapunzel. So naturally that didn't help for me to learn how to navigate and identify, possibly red flags and which relationships are maybe better to stay away from, et cetera. So, so I was, fortunate, of course, to survive. And I think the biggest thing that really helped me in that journey was recognizing I know that relationships are work, but this felt particularly hard. And
Mhm.
because I was also fortunate in that situation, oftentimes from other women I've spoken with in similar, who went through similar things,
Mhm.
they would say, oftentimes they were like, sort of isolated because they were like the housewife and kept in that
Mhm.
role. And it was the perpetrator who was out in the world. And in my
Yeah.
situation, it was the opposite. So I was the one working, and so I had access to these other things. And I think what I realized is through these extra experiences, I found my own power. I found my own ability. So even though I didn't have it, and it became, affirmation for me, like, oh, I have something to offer and I have skills that I can acquire. And so I think that planted the seed that then generalized to these other areas of, I don't it doesn't have to be this hard, and I don't have to put up with this, and I don't have to feel so small and so worthless like
Mm.
I was feeling in that particular relationship. So all of that, just leaning into that desire was, I think, what brought me out of it and brought me through it. And then, of course, it
Mhm.
led me to other resources to help me in a more significant way to expedite the process.
Yeah.
But I think that's where it started. And so then, of course, I met my incredible partner, and he had a daughter, and um, I became, a stepmom. And to be very frank, I was terrified because I had realized all these issues, all these things I'd been through, and I had these really wonderful socially conscious reasons as to why I should not be a parent, and they were legitimate. Um, I really do feel like I definitely identify with a lot of those reasons, but I recognize that I wanted to be a parent. I was just really scared to pass down the stuff. I was scared of,
Mm.
not being good at it. I was scared of, you know, passing down similar experiences that I had had where like there wasn't a lot of understanding or
Mm.
what have you. And I so I was just terrified, and I was kind of leaning into these socially conscious reasons to keep myself safe and small and kind of denying myself something that I really wanted in my life.
Mhm.
And when I shared all these really great reasons and encouraged my partner to be like, you need a better role model for your daughter. What are you doing? I'll help you find a really good match. um, and he said, because you know what you didn't like as a kid from a parent, you are probably going to be a really great parent. You,
Yeah.
and so, it took me a while to let that wash over me. And then
Mm.
I stopped dreading it. And then I just made the choice to fully commit to this child in whatever way I could,
Mm.
right? Any time and opportunity that I had. And it's been absolutely remarkable. And another really scary moment was 5 years ago, just so happens, roughly 5 years ago. And 5 years into my step parenting role, she revealed that she was abused and neglected by mom and stepdad,
Mm.
and which is where she was spending most of her time at that time.
Mm.
And so that was a horrifying moment, but also a moment of great relief because there had been some concerning things having to do with primarily her schoolwork was where we really saw this take
Mm.
effect.
Hmm.
And at that point, she was in middle school. And so on the one hand, it was like our worst nightmare coming true. And on the other hand, it was such a relief to finally know and finally have a way to move forward effectively to support her and help her. Because
Yeah.
it was very clear she was struggling, but we didn't know for, I would say, I mean, several years, obviously, while it was going on, but especially when it was all
Mm.
coming to a head the last couple of years, we had no idea. And we would
Mm.
try and talk to her, and she was silent. So she didn't say anything.
Mm.
So at that point, my company had restructured. At that point, I was in healthcare and I was supporting sales and marketing. And those two departments went away. So my job became obsolete. And so I um, found myself in a position where I was just dreading for some reason getting another one of those jobs. But I stumbled on a trauma informed parent coaching program. And within 2 days, I was enrolled and I was off and running, and I absolutely loved it. And not only was it enormously beneficial to help me, support my stepdaughter, obviously, but it was even beneficial to further heal some of my own childhood wounds. And then I, found a core coaching program just because I wanted more of that competency. And so I ended up doing that. And then a year after that, I found rapid resolution therapy, which has been absolutely remarkable. And I'm really honored to be a practitioner of that. It's just amazing. It's a modality that's an alternative to psychotherapy, and it's
Mm.
enormously powerful to help people shift and have awesome transformations, and basically shift through any negative thoughts or emotions or even actions, in order
Wow.
to really live the life that they want to live and just be free and clear. So yeah,
Awesome.
so that's how a
Wow,
little
that is a
about
full
me.
circle moment. I mean, that I love using our wounds to serve a need that we see where we can actually be informed about what's going on. A lot of people who are coaching people maybe aren't even a step parent, or
Yeah.
maybe haven't even been through what they're coaching someone else through. When you've lived that thing, you bring such a different perspective to the table. So tell us a little bit about you. You said you just had that sense of dread in getting another job. Tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about what your job was like in healthcare with sales and marketing and kind of, I mean, I know that angsty feeling that wanting getting out of that, but tell us about that transition. I know it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
What all went into that for you?
Yeah, I think at that point I was working for a large corporation, or a subsidiary of a large corporation, and I just felt like it wasn't hands-on enough for me. I had
Mhm.
worked in a different company prior to that job, and I felt much more integral, to the actual company. Like I was working directly with the CEO suite and of folks, and I was supporting them, and it was a smaller company and it didn't have that corporate feel. So for
Mhm.
me, that was different. I also was in a very different place in my personal life at that point. I think I was just excited that I was able to make a real meaningful contribution. And in this season, I was really looking for something more meaningful where I can have a direct impact. And somehow, I had considered back when I was in college, doing psychology or something like that, and it just didn't fully resonate for me. So
Mhm.
when I discovered coaching, and particularly parent coaching, I don't know why, but it was like a light bulb aha moment of like clouds parting and the sun,
This is what I
beating
was born to
down.
do.
Exactly. Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
waking up in almost middle age discovering this.
Yes. Exactly.
That's terrifying. Did you have,
Yes.
for me, I'm like, did I have a little bit of guilt going, what have I been wasting all this time?
Yeah, I was
Did
like,
you
"Why
have that
have
too?
I definitely was like, "How can I have I never heard of this?" And then I reflected and I was like, not to date myself, but to date myself, I was like, "This probably didn't exist when I was going to college," because
Yeah.
or if
Yeah.
it did, it was just in its very, like, early seedling stages because let's
Mhm.
face it, the whole career, you know, landscape has changed so much. And
Yes.
for sure in the last, 15 to 20 years. So I
Yeah.
just, I just had to give myself grace, but I can't tell you how excited in spite of that little bit of fear and like frustration of like, why hasn't this been a thing? I was just so excited to have come across something that really lit me up. And I could just feel like all through my whole body, it resonated like, this
Wow.
is it. This is the thing. So yeah, just lots of gratitude.
Yeah, I bet. So what did those first days look like? Did you pull out a loan? I mean, I know everybody's worried about like, how am I going to replace my salary when I'm getting this thing
Yes.
going?
Yes. Well, so in the trauma informed program, a parent coaching program that I did, we learned a lot about different sorts of situations. Obviously, kids who had undergone trauma having to do with abuse, but also um, foster situations and adoption situations and
Mm,
autism situations, or like
mhm,
just learning about autism because I'd heard of the term and I sort of knew what it was, but I didn't really know. And when
mhm.
I learned about it, I realized, it's fascinating and it is there's so much diversity in situations, just with not only with abilities, but even just what that looks like in each person. Um, and so I actually really wanted to learn more about what that looks like for parents who are dealing with a child who has autism, and what is the parenting, what is needed of them, right? And
Mhm.
how are they responding to that, and what kind of a toll is it taking on them, and just what does their day-to-day look like. So I was fortunate. So to support myself, I actually ended up working in applied behavioral analysis, and working with kids on the autism spectrum so that I can support them and then in turn support their families and have a better understanding of what their day-to-day looks like, and just have a better understanding of that population and the parents' needs around, raising a child on the spectrum. So
Nice.
that was the way that I supported myself. Yeah, in the early days while building my business. So
Nice.
I didn't have to take out a loan. Luckily, I just kind of like went for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And how long has it been since you went out on your own?
Yeah, it's been 2 years, and the last a little bit over a year has been focusing on the step parenting and, supporting blended families as well.
hmm So tell us a little bit about what it's like to work with you. Who are your clients?
Yeah.
Is it the whole family, just the step parent? Tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah. So I have a VIP program, and it really is geared to support the step parent in particular because they're coming in during a really potentially exciting time, but a really vulnerable time for the family. They are usually recovering at whatever stage from essentially a fracture, right? Because
hmm
there's been some sort of a divorce or separation or a loss of a parent, possibly as well. And for kids in particular, that just takes a really long time to bounce back from because
hmm
that is the only family they've ever known. To them, it's not like, oh, it was a partner and it didn't work out. To them, it's like, this is mom and dad. And they're
hmm
biologically wired for that connection and for those bonds. And even with the partner, the adult who is the parent, there's still a lot there because oftentimes they are mourning the loss of the relationship, unfulfilled like expectations. Nobody ever gets married expecting to get divorced. That's
Right.
usually something that just happens. And it's very emotional and it's taxing. And then depending on the situation, there can be additional stressors, especially when it's a contention, when there's lots of contention and
hmm
conflict. So it's just not easy. And this person is coming in, and on the one hand, the parent of these children is probably excited to move on. And at the same time, there's all these emotional things that they're dealing with. And then now this individual also, in addition to having to build a rapport with, their partner and new relationship and a new bond, they also have to build trust and rapport with the kids. And they also have to, learn how to build community with the extended family, including the ex-partner in often cases. So it's tricky and it's a lot. And just coming into a family, oftentimes it's easy to overlook. There is an established culture. There's like nuances of little figures of speech and shorthand for things and a rhythm that's been established, from the
hmm
beginning, and that things are moving kind of in a flow. And this individual's coming in and they don't know any of that. And they have
hmm
to pick up on it and learn it. And then also find their place in it all. And it can be a lot. It could be really challenging. At times it could be overwhelming and lonely. So that's really where I come in is to help them navigate that. Both as far as, navigating their own kind of emotions and needs, and also strengthening, their values and their boundaries as far as what do they want it to look like. And we work on also getting them aligned with their partner because that can be a thing that happens really, really easily.
hmm
It just arises because it's like, oh, we didn't talk about it. Oh, by the way, there's a situation, we got to deal with it. Oh, and we don't agree.
Whoops.
Exactly, exactly. So we make sure that whatever is feeling good, that is discussed, that there's cohesion. And also, I help them build the trust with their stepchild and, and community with the extended family. And there's also, of course, skills involved as well to all of that, and nuance and um, different things that can, one learns after time, but isn't necessarily obvious right away because we're not used to having to consider so many perspectives all at
hmm
once. So, yeah.
So what are some of those tips that you can give a step parent coming into a new situation? I know when I've been married
Yeah.
to my husband for 5 years now, when I met him, he
Mhm.
had one adult daughter that already had a child, and then the other two were teenagers. And
Mhm.
my two boys were also young, 13 and about 8. So,
Mhm.
he got two, young men, and I got basically a jury of women, young women that were looking at me going, "Who's this broad? Like,
Right.
we're not down for this. She's not mom. This is late in life. I ain't trying to be ran by nobody else."
Mhm.
So, what are some of the very first steps or things that step parents need to be aware of coming into, maybe
Yes.
even just a dating situation?
Yes. I would say for sure, go slow. Right? Like, remember, the kids are probably they will just need you to go a lot slower than
Hmm.
you and your partner, and things are exciting. You're like, things are, rocking and shaking and moving because you're adults and, you've had other relationships and you're excited because you found somebody that you really care about. And of course, you want to move it, at an expedited speed because you're just like, I'm not wasting any more time. But kids need time to adjust and they need you to go slow for exactly the reasons you identified. They can feel threatened. They can kind of question, like, who is this coming in and what are my expectations to,
Hmm.
of this person? What are her or his expectations of me? Right? Like, how is that relationship going to be? Are they just going to come and rule the roost now? There's a lot of
Hmm.
fear. There's a lot of concerns for them. So I would say just go slow, take it easy, keep it casual with kids if you are, dating somebody with children and you have an opportunity to meet them. And really tune in, right? Because oftentimes we get a sense from them, right? Like they'll tell us either verbally or non-verbally or through facial expressions.
Yes, they
You'll get
will.
a vibe.
You'll
Yes,
know.
you'll know exactly what they're comfortable with. And I think it's really important to remember, don't take it personally because it's not
Yeah.
personal. It's not. They're just
Hmm.
dealing with the transition and it's a lot. And
Hmm.
they're going to need to take some time with it. And, keeping open lines of communication is really important. And I always encourage being direct, as far as keeping those lines of communication open and maybe even introduce like the thing that feels scary and uncomfortable to say just to remove that pressure from them of having to say it and just say like, "Hey, does it ever feel like this? Do you feel weird? Is this weird? Am I, you know, are you uncomfortable with me like being here so often or like are you feeling like you're not getting enough time with mom or dad?" Just all those things that are there's a very good chance that all of that is something that's going through their minds.
Hmm.
So just removing the pressure and naming the thing. And
Hmm.
if that's not it, most of the time they'll tell you, or again, they'll communicate to you in some way. You'll be able to decipher it. And if you're not comfortable having that conversation, encouraging your partner to have the conversation, to
Hmm.
do it one on one, because maybe they'll get a little bit more of the story because they're the primary, bio parent and they've had
Hmm.
a much longer established relationship with those kids.
Yeah. I'm interested to know your take. I remember hearing when after my divorce and was starting to thinking about dating, I will never forget. Here I am dating myself. I remember hearing Dr. Laura. Do you remember
Mm,
her, the radio show, Dr. Laura? Okay, she
no.
was this call-in radio show,
Okay.
and she was like a therapist, and she was a mom of several kids and all of this stuff. She was a single mom, I believe, and she had a very hard and fast rule, like parents don't need to be dating. Parents with children don't need to be dating. You should be
Mm,
focused on your children. And I thought, I mean, now this has been quite a long time ago, but I thought, I don't know. I think there's something in between. I don't know that
yeah.
necessarily the parent needs to put their life completely on hold.
Right.
And their happiness doesn't have to be completely tied just to their children, because then what? Children are a
Right.
finite project, whether we want to believe it or not.
Yeah.
I'm always going to be a mother, but these kids are on their way out the door. Our youngest is 14. They're not going to need me in the same way they do forever. So what is your take
Yes.
on that? And kind of when
I
is the right time, if there ever
yeah.
is?
I completely agree with you. I think what's so important So often, we have this fear as parents. We want to protect our babies from absolutely any sort of like pain and discomfort. We just want to like cushion the whole world with, I don't know, like mats and cotton balls. And we just can't, right? That's just not
Mm-mm.
realistic. And the other thing is, if there's a part of you you're locking away, they're going to feel it. They're going to know
Mhm.
it. They're going to sense
Mhm.
that you are not your whole self. And
Mhm.
they're going to feel that there's like an emptiness or a longing or whatever it is, and they're most likely going to start blaming themselves for it. And there's a
Mm.
strong possibility of you developing resentment, even though they didn't do it, right? Like it's your
Yeah.
choice. But if you keep going, like you're locking yourself away, you're compartmentalizing.
Mm.
That isn't the best way. And how can we
Yeah.
hope to have healthy kids who are able to make difficult decisions and be vulnerable if we aren't willing to be vulnerable ourselves and be open with them and saying, hey, this is hard, but here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm feeling, let's talk about it, right? Like I think if anything, actually, yes, for sure there has to be boundaries, especially with little kids, right? We never want to feel
Mhm.
like we're putting too much adult stuff and decision making on their shoulders, because that can be overwhelming to them and it definitely rocks their sense of security. But where possible, to introduce in little simple ways the conversation of, hey, like, your dad and I, or your mom and I are not getting back together. I how would you feel about me dating sometime? Just it can be a casual conversation, doesn't have to be this imminent threat or this imminent thing that's like happening tomorrow.
Mhm.
You can
Yeah.
start to introduce, and also these things coming around to change or different ideas. It doesn't happen overnight often. So knowing that there's going to be multiple touch points and creating space for these conversations to explore and kind of think on it and sort of, sleep on it a little and reintroduce the conversation, and over time things start to unlock, and at the very least you know exactly where your child is at and you know their concerns and you're able to help them navigate that and
Mhm.
or identify supports for how they can navigate through that, right? And
Mhm.
I mean, really, a part of it too, one could say, is working on flexibility, right? Because
Mhm.
like, yes, difficult things will happen or things you're not necessarily jumping on board with, but nonetheless that's life and there's going to be those moments. So how can you be flexible to coming around? How can you make it okay for yourself, right?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think, yeah,
I can't I can't agree with you more about the sheltering. Like we want to protect our kids, but it's not doing them any favors. It's not
yeah,
serving them. They have to see
yeah,
relationships fail. Not
yeah,
everything works out. And
yeah,
this is how we navigate that healthily, because every relationship that child has is not going to work out. Not
yeah,
to say they're going to end up in divorce like we did,
sure,
but just relationships in general, it's not going to work out. We have to teach our kids how to fail and show our kids that we
yeah.
fail and how we can pivot from that failure and learn from it.
Yes, and that we can be okay, especially when we stick together, right? Like that we're not alone. So like your
Yeah.
child, they're not alone going through this transition. You're there with them, and vice versa, that like you're grateful for their support. Not to,
Mhm.
again, not to say to lean on them too much, because adults still need to be able to talk to adults and not just, think that it's okay to discuss everything with our child, but introducing
Right.
different ideas to their child, and even just food for thought, like the little nuggets of like, let's talk about this. How does this feel? What do you think about this? And it's okay if you don't want to talk about it right now, but let me know and we'll come back to it. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Mhm.
Like what feels good, what doesn't.
What about communication with the ex partner?
Yeah. um, so obviously that can look in like a number of different things. Of course, ideally, you can co-parent together and be able to be, not only civil, but supporting the kids and being able to be at functions together. But it really depends on the specific situation. If you're noticing that every little thing is exploding into a toxic situation that's causing more frustration and more anger and negativity, then maybe you dial that back a little bit. And maybe you need to, it really just depends on the situation. But for example, if just being in their presence is difficult, then maybe you kind of stagger that time a little bit, especially depending on how long it has been, right? Like maybe right after a breakup, it's particularly difficult and you need to take a little bit of space, but then it gets easier. And, maybe you try your best and you're like, okay, that I can feel myself upticking. I just need to go find a bathroom and like throw some cold water on my face and just take 5, and then I can, come back. Or, maybe the best thing to do, for example, if it's a handoff situation and you're like, I don't know, you decided to go to a park together or do something together and you're like, okay, I really can't handle it. You need to, possibly excuse yourself and just say, I'm going to go. I'm going to let you have your time with your mom or your dad and, just gracefully exit. It really, it really depends because there's just so many different scenarios and situations. And, but I
Yeah.
think the best thing we can do is really tune into our needs and be super cognizant of what is needed, what is happening. Is there a pattern developing here? And
Hmm.
how would it be best to resolve that? I've heard of
Yeah.
people communicating exclusively through text messages because it just, it keeps things more neutral. There isn't like a tone or something like that. And I've also heard, taking basically a business approach to the conversation,
Hmm.
as opposed to, because I think in romantic relationships, it's so easy to get wrapped up and everything becomes, like, more involved. Everything becomes more kind of not entangled, but it just gets more emotional. It gets more
Yeah.
personal. And when you're able to take a step back and say, okay, if this was a client, how would I respond to them? How would I
Hmm.
handle it that way? And usually it's easier to remove emotions from that situation and
Yeah.
just see, okay, what is my goal here? What would make the most sense to
Yeah.
not make things worse?
Well, as the parent or the divorcee, when we're in the middle of it, everything is so magnified. It's
Yeah.
like being a 13-year-old kid whose boyfriend broke up with him. Like, that's the biggest thing in the world to us. Well, as
Yeah.
adults, we know that's a very, very tiny thing. But I love what you said about taking that, what would I do in a client situation? Or what would a rational, reasonable person think about this situation? Am I
Exactly.
being rational and reasonable? Probably not.
Right.
And why is
Right.
this so magnified? Because it's so personal and it's so close. Yeah.
Exactly. And even, sometimes just taking a little time to respond.
Mhm.
You're upset at whatever you just saw come through, like a request, or maybe you heard a voicemail or a text message. Just take some time, just breathe, just give yourself that moment because you probably won't be, excuse me, you probably won't be as angry about it if you just take 5 minutes or, 10 or what have you. And using that time intentionally, like go take a walk or go sit outside and just breathe, you know?
Yeah.
Or
Take
I
a
mean,
walk. Taking a walk's everything for me. Get out.
exactly. Yeah. Put on a great song that you love that just calms you down or puts you in a good mood. Or, like I said, I don't know, take a shower. It could look like different things for different people.
Here's something that might make some step parents or divorcees uncomfortable. How about taking personal responsibility for
Yeah.
what happened?
Yeah.
That was something I had to really face in my own divorce.
Yeah.
Everyone looking from the outside in would have said that was absolutely you're not your fault in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
My ex-husband was gay. And
Mhm.
after 20 years together and 10 years of marriage and 2 children, that was a very difficult situation to navigate for me.
Mhm.
However, I had responsibility, right?
Mhm.
Somebody wrecks us and rear ends us in our car. It might not be our fault, but we have
Yeah.
a responsibility in it. We've got to call our insurance agent. We're going to have to get the
Right.
repairs done. We have to get a rental vehicle. We got to get ourselves from, get the tow truck. We have a
Yeah.
responsibility. So
Yeah.
being that bigger person and being able to get along with the
Yes.
ex-spouse for the
Yes.
sake of the children, I absolutely have zero tolerance for people who are not willing to do that. I've seen so many toxic situations with the parents fighting and this
Yes.
poor child stuck in the middle. And you're going, really? You can't take your bit of responsibility? We
Yeah.
all have a responsibility somewhere. And
Yeah.
whether we think it serves the other spouse or not, it's going to serve that child in some way, positive or negative. So we get
Yeah.
to choose that.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think where it gets really tricky though is I do believe that everybody truly is doing their very best that they can at any given moment. And
Mhm.
I think what you're talking about, and I've also seen it, is I think that is the fallout of, not fully either identifying or tending to your own needs. you
Mm-hmm.
know,
That's it.
and either not getting the support that you need, because it is enormous. I mean, it is devastating to go through divorce. It is
Mm-hmm.
completely life altering, and
Mm-hmm.
it's awful on
Oh
in every
yeah.
possible way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's completely understandable but because there's the responsibility, like you said, of being a parent and having a job and moving on, and all of that just adds up. And it's so easy as a culture. I think we tend to kind of just overlook our own needs and like, nope, I got to put one foot in front of the other and just keep
Mm-hmm.
marching through and keeping all these balls in the air. And I think that's where that can really possibly fall apart and create a
Mm-hmm.
lot more issues.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
yeah. So I
for
think that's the
sure.
number one key is like, even if you don't think you need it, just get yourself supports anyway, because you
Yeah.
probably need it more than you realize. You just haven't even taken a
Oh
breath
yeah. Right.
to recognize what it is you need and just how
Oh,
badly you
for
need it.
sure. Yeah. It was years before I came to that, the realization that, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I do have a responsibility in this. And I quit playing that victim role. But
Yes.
what it took was seeking support,
Yeah.
seeking that, that outside opinion that could look at me and truly say, here's what the real situation, here's what a rational person would think.
Yeah.
Not what you are feeling right now, but
Yeah.
here's the next rational action step you
Yeah.
can take to make
Yeah.
yourself better and therefore your whole situation better.
Yeah. And I think that's really the value of getting, a coach or a therapist or whoever you identified as is a necessary support for you
Mm-hmm.
in that, wherever you're at, is that they are a guide. They can help you when you are like, everything is coming at me all at once. I can't even see through it straight.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's just a blur with all the
Yes.
needs and expectations. They can
Yes.
help you identify that next step, that one thing, and they can help you prioritize, where to put your energy because you only have so much and there's only so
Mm-hmm.
many hours in the day to do all the things. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. People are looking for an answer and looking for a hero. And it can't always be ourselves. We got to seek out some help sometimes.
Yeah.
Speaking of being a guide, you have a guide on your website to resolve the 5 most common step parenting challenges in 5 days. You want to tell us a little bit about that guide?
Yeah, it just touches on all the pillars that I mentioned, and it gives you one little thing you can do to move the ball forward in those directions. And, to even just to identify, what is going on for you at any given moment. Like, what do you need? Just taking some distance and taking some time to yourself. And there's just some good little very actionable things to put into use right away that will be really helpful just to start to alleviate the tension and the pressure and the conflict and yeah, so I think that's really
So would this be a good guide for someone who maybe isn't even quite in that step parent role yet? Maybe someone who's thinking about dating someone with kids. Would this be something that they could access and maybe preemptively
yes.
prepare for this situation that's forthcoming?
Yeah, I so love
I
that
wish
you
I'd
said that.
known some things before.
I love that you said that. Absolutely. And the other good thing is that it puts them on my email list, and I will have some trainings coming up totally for free and actually specifically geared towards folks who are just contemplating dating again. So
Ah,
absolutely. I look at step parents. I know some people look at it very rigidly and it's like you have to be married. I think anyone dating anyone with kids is a step parent because you're in that position. You are in these children's lives and you
mhm.
are up against the same kinds of things that a legal step parent would be up against. So in my opinion, and I also think these days people are not rushing to the altar as quickly as they once did. And the
Right.
reality
Yeah.
is that I'm seeing out there are people who are, basically a step parent, but it's for years before if not, they might just choose not to get married at all, especially,
Mhm.
given, and again, it kind of makes sense, somebody's already had an experience of getting divorced and going through all of that, it's not as easy to sort of buck up and be like, yeah, I'm going to try this again and do all of this again
Yeah.
and like
Yeah. Like
see
I
what
am never
happens.
doing
And
that again. I know I said that
right,
many, many times. I'm never doing
right,
that again. Here I
right.
am.
It's right.
Married.
Yeah, it takes a while. It takes a while to come around. So for sure. Yeah, I believe that better, the best defense is a great offense. So I agree with you. I think getting the information and support, or at least identifying the support that is available is,
Mhm.
is excellent. And I also produce a podcast with actionable tips that I usually share also weekly. So they can get some really great information with even more things that they can put into action for themselves and, to move forward in their step parenting journey.
Awesome. Well, I know we're running short on time already. This has gone by so fast. I know that you said you have a VIP group coaching. It's a
Yes.
group coaching, but do you also
Yes.
work one-on-one individually?
Yeah. So, so actually the VIP program is one-on-one,
Oh, okay.
and that is, like I said, geared primarily towards step parents. However, I am a rapid resolution practitioner, and I offer those sessions to, really anybody. So that could be even to a partner and any extended family member who is affected by this or is having a difficult time, adjusting for whatever reason.
Okay.
And
So maybe
even,
like the parents, like my mother who was
yeah,
struggling with the
absolutely.
situation, or okay.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, really anybody in that
Mhm.
circle. And
Mhm.
even to the children. The one caveat is the child has to be the one to identify that there's something that they would like to be different, that they're struggling with, and
Mhm.
that they would like that to be a change. So certainly I, speak to the guardian or parent. But in
Mhm.
addition, I request to speak to the child to verify that, it really is their initiative. And
Mhm.
because in order to have success, right, like they have to be the one driving
Yeah.
this, because it's just not the kind of thing that somebody can be forced into.
No, for sure not. Oh, no, no. And yeah, I remember my kids saying one time during the therapy after the divorce, my older son says, if that woman asked me how something makes me feel one more time. So I was like, okay, it's
Yeah.
time to maybe take a different approach with
Yes. Yes.
yeah, he didn't want any part of it. So,
Yeah.
well, tell the listeners where they can get in contact with you if they have, if they are a step parent or thinking about dating, there's some way they think you may be able to serve them. Where's the best place to connect with you?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, my website for the freebie is an excellent way, which is at synergisticstepparenting.com/subscribe. But also I hang out on LinkedIn. And that's
Okay.
at Synergistic Step Parenting, and also on Facebook, and that's at Maria Natapov. So I'm always happy to, chat in DMs, or get an email if there's any questions. So yeah.
And they do not have to be, I'm assuming you can work with anybody from anywhere
Yes,
via Zoom.
absolutely. Yes, exactly. Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, via Zoom and via phone calls as well, because sometimes Zoom fatigue is real and that can be challenging for folks. And I do
Sure.
offer free assessment calls, which is really a great way to identify not only, whether we're a good fit, but really just to get a little more clarity on where you're at in your step parenting journey, what's working, what's not working, and just to get some very clear next step action items of how to move forward, to create more ease and joy and peace.
Nice. Well, I think that's something we can all agree we all need, whether step parent or otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest. Everybody go over to synergisticstepparenting.com, claim that free resource, get that guide, and start discovering how you might be a better step parent, or how you may be a step parent one day.
Yes. Thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate your time. It's been great to chat with you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thanks for being my guest, and thank you for being a queen that leads all the way from Moscow.
Thanks.